It is the softer side of American foreign policy and power. Seen in the world's most distressed places, its message from the American people on every bag of grain, every can of cooking oil, on posters in remote health centers. And at barely 1% of the federal budget, it's a good bargain for the American taxpayer, says the head of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, the primary conduit for foreign aid.
Americans have so much to be proud of.
At this Senate hearing, Administrator Samantha Power cited one program that has provided antiretroviral drugs to HIV patients for 2 decades.
PEPFAR, George W. Bush's tremendous creation. 17 million people alive today, lives saved because of the generosity of the taxpayer.
But overseas assistance programs have long come under fire from some conservatives, like Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul, who see them as wasteful and misplaced.
We should be conserving our resources, particularly conserving them for our country. There's not a great deal of evidence that the money that we, launder throughout the world really over time has been a benefit to us. There's a great deal of evidence that much of it's been stolen. We mentioned corruption.
The criticism no longer comes just from some Republicans, but increasingly from those who strongly favor foreign aid. They say it helps buy goodwill, helps America's standing vis-a-vis Russia or China, keeps infectious diseases at bay, and helps turn dependent countries into trading partners. At least it's supposed to do that. But these critics say only a small portion of aid dollars are actually spent in the countries targeted for help.
It's actually less than 10% of our foreign assistance dollars flowing through USAID is actually reaching those communities.
Walter Kurz, with a group called Unlock Aid, formed in 2021 to draw attention to a system in which a relative handful of private companies called implementing partners are awarded most contracts by USAID.
One of the best things that government can do is to move away from measuring success in terms of outputs, how much money do we spend on a particular problem, and moving toward an orientation of results.
A lot of people will be shocked to hear that that's not the case.
Well, it's true. About 98% of U.S. aid grants pay for activities and not results.
And the results are not flattering, according to the agency's own Inspector General's office, which studied USAID awards for 3 years, 2017 to 2019.
43% of them failed to achieve about half of the intended results. But in spite of that, they still got paid in full almost every time, and sometimes more.
He says one reason for these poor results is that implementer companies rarely work with communities targeted for help or with local aid groups.
One study found that when working with a local partner as opposed to an international aid contractor, you could find savings of upwards of 32% alone, and that's a conservative estimate.
And one reason that does not happen is compliance with strict guidelines written by Congress. Here's Idaho Republican Senator Jim Risch.
Corruption with U.S. dollars will not be tolerated, and I'm glad to see detailed information that gives me confidence that our money is being used appropriately.
They went to the groups that can absolutely deliver on a contract every time so that no one in this mix is accused of fraud, waste, or abuse.
But it's compliance, it's not delivering results that improve people's lives.
And that's the quiet part that no one wants to say out loud.
Justin Richmond is an Army veteran who later worked with USAID in Afghanistan. In 2015, he founded a nonprofit that collects and analyzes data on conditions in conflict-torn areas, working with local community leaders to learn what they see as the most pressing needs and to learn the root causes of the conflict or suffering. He says he's found few takers among aid companies.
The for-profits aren't properly subcontracting down to the experts. They're keeping everything in-house because, again, no one's checking on them, no one's trying to have impact.
Richmond told me he once shared findings gathered in the conflict-ridden Sahel region of West Africa with the largest aid implementing company, Chemonix. Data that he said would be useful to improve the outcome of development projects.
She looked at it and at the end said, "This is phenomenal work. You should really be proud of it, especially where you collected it. Incredible. But you got to tell me, why would we ever do this?" I was speechless, and she said to me, "If USAID isn't paying us to do that, we're not going to do that." The client didn't even ask for it.
We invited Comonix to comment. They declined, as did the main trade group of aid-implementing companies.
Moving forward, we are going to provide at least a quarter of all of our funds directly to local partners over the course of the next 4 years.
At the time Administrator Power made that pledge in 2021, local partners got just about 7% of award dollars. The agency has moved to simplify the grants process, also requiring some new contracts to phase in locally led control. That percentage has since hovered near 10%, still well short of the target. Power declined our request for an interview, as did Mark Green, her predecessor from the first Trump administration.
It's not easy. It takes time. 4 years isn't enough time.
Brian Atwood was USAID administrator during the Clinton administration. He traces some of the agency's current problems back to his tenure at the end of the Cold War.
People said they wanted a peace dividend. The peace dividend didn't come out of the Defense Department. It came out of USAID. So I lost 10% of our employees.
At the same time, the agency added all of Europe's former Eastern Bloc nations to its workload, which continued to grow, he says.
When I was aid administrator, the overall budget was around $12 billion. It's now more like $38 billion. And we haven't seen an equal increase in the amount of staffing, what they call operations expenses. And so the consequence was they had to push everything out the door to larger organizations.
That outsourcing has become the norm today, Atwood says, and it's easier to manage fewer and therefore larger grants with companies familiar with the process. All this has had the effect of shutting out a lot of innovation that could improve people's lives, says Unlock Aid's Walter Kerr.
You can look at some of the amazing organizations, entrepreneurs that are already active in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and deliberately identify them and begin to scale up their impact. They're out there.
We are able to trace every single drug in this warehouse right to the patient's home.
One example he cites is M-Pharma, a chain of pharmacy-based clinics across Africa. Founder Gregory Roxon says the big USAID contractors are not focused on delivering results, but rather on writing grants and glossy reports.
The goal was never to eradicate the problem. It was to create the appearance of eradicating that problem.
That keeps the spigot of foreign assistance open, he says, but the dollars flowing mostly between the U.S. government and companies, most based in Washington, D.C. In following reports, we look at some Africa-based startups that have won praise for delivering aid. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Fred DeSam Lazaro in